Well, a warm hello. This is Dan Arth, and for the next 1 hour, I will be reading from the June 10th, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And our first headline from the Toronto Star: Health Canada quietly reviewing pesticide the agency said was safe. In 2015, WHO concluded glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans. Article is by Frederick Plante and Emma McIntosh. The retraction last year of an influential study underpinning the safety of Roundup spurred calls for regulators to reconsider their approval of the popular pesticide. But Health Canada, which had cited the study during a past product review, told the public that its position, informed by hundreds of additional scientific studies, remained unchanged. Roundup's key ingredient, glyphosate, is safe. A few weeks later, however, Health Canada quietly stepped up its oversight of the controversial pesticide. The Star has learned in a December 18th email obtained through an Access to Information request, Shannon LaForce, a director for Health Canada's pesticide regulator, told recipients whose names were redacted that the government had begun monitoring glyphosate under its continuous oversight policy. The federal government has said that the new policy, published in October, will better position officials to keep atop evolving science and detect emerging risks. Glyphosate is an active ingredient in pesticides used in agricultural and forestry, including the weed killer Roundup. It is commonly applied to canola, wheat, and other crops. It is also used by the forestry industry to clear other vegetation where lumber is harvested. Monsanto, now owned by German company Bayer, first introduced it in the 1970s. The journal Regulatory Toxicology and Pharmacology issued a retraction notice last fall, years after records that surfaced in a U.S. lawsuit suggested Monsanto employees may have ghostwritten a landmark article published in 2000. The journal said the article, which concluded there was no link between glyphosate and cancer, did so based solely on unpublished studies from Monsanto. It also said the study's authors might have been paid by the firm for their work without proper disclosure. There have long been safety concerns surrounding the chemical. After independently reviewing about 1,000 studies, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer concluded in 2015 that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans. The newly initiated monitoring process could lead Health Canada's Pesticides Regulatory Directorate, PRD, to undertake a special review of glyphosate. If at any time during the registration lifecycle the PRD has reasonable grounds to believe that health or environmental risks or the value of a pesticide may no longer be acceptable, according to department policy, such a review may amend or cancel the registration of the pesticide. Continuous monitoring of glyphosate is a positive step given the large volume of emerging science raising concern about glyphosate's health and environmental risks, said Bronwyn Rowe, a lawyer with EcoJustice, a charity that pursues environmental protections in court. Health Canada already has sufficient information to warrant a special review of, at the very least, the toxicity, including carcinogenicity of glyphosate, Rowe said. I am hopeful that continuous oversight and monitoring of glyphosate will lead to a special review or a more comprehensive re-evaluation. Health Canada said the decision to monitor glyphosate is not related to the retraction of the 2000 study, which does not affect Health Canada's previous review conclusions. The department said it made the decision to include glyphosate under continuous oversight because of the volume and pace of new information generated for glyphosate since the regulator's product review in 2017. Health Canada said that it shared the oversight decision in December with registrants of glyphosate products, federal and provincial governments, and non-governmental organizations. Though Health Canada's intent is to expand continuous oversight to cover all registered pesticides over a number of years, the department said it is phasing it in with a shorter list of products, including glyphosate. Asked about Health Canada's monitoring, Baer said that this process does not indicate a health concern for glyphosate. Baer says it stands behind the safety of its glyphosate-based products, and national regulators that approve herbicides for agriculture and forestry have generally agreed. Health Canada has approved glyphosate-based herbicides for use until 2032. Last year, it reaffirmed the results of its 2017 review that found the chemical is unlikely to pose cancer risks to humans. Health Canada said it reached this conclusion using a more restrictive, risk-based approach that differed from the WHO's assessment of glyphosate as probably carcinogenic. The science around the chemical is disputed. In recent years, waves of lawsuits and a growing chorus of environmental groups have pointed to newer studies that suggest a link between glyphosate and cancer. And the story does continue. If you would like to have our staff read that to you, please call 716-821-5555. And our next headline story, Air Canada, man accused of piloting over 900 flights without proper license. Article by Denia Yacoub and Peter Edwards. He flew over 900 flights over 17 years without a valid license, police say. While there's no telling if, like Icarus, he flew too close to the sun, a former Air Canada pilot has been grounded in a plot that mirrors the 2002 movie Catch Me If You Can. Peel police on Tuesday revealed the details of Project Icarus, a complex fraud probe involving the former pilot whose case read like a movie script, investigators said, referring to the Leonardo DiCaprio classic. Police announced charges against 59-year-old Jeffrey Wall from Barrie, including fraud and public mischief, following the 4-month investigation during a news conference at Peel Police Headquarters. Where have you seen something so sensational? Chief Nishan Durpa asked in an interview at Peel Police Headquarters. As I understand, this is a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, at least to this extent, he added. This is very similar to a doctor who is licensed to practice family medicine and is doing brain surgery in his office, Deputy Chief Nick Milanovich told reporters. To me, this is a safety issue. One person bypassing those credentials leads to consequences which undermines and introduces risks and impacts to our community, but also the integrity of a profession, Milanovich said. Wall began his career with Air Canada back in 1998 and was made captain 11 years later in 2009. Police allege he was misrepresenting credentials to his employer and regulatory officials through fraudulent documents. He retired from Air Canada last year. The pilot is accused of flying around the world and operating multiple types of aircraft, each carrying hundreds of passengers, according to Detective Sergeant Chad Michel of the Fraud Bureau. The investigation, which began in late January, was initiated after a regulatory review by Transport Canada into the licensing and credentials of the pilot. Milanovich said investigators arrested Wall on June 1st after executing a residential search warrant. Police also exercised a number of other judicial authorizations, witness interviews, and forensic analysis to gather evidence in support of the allegations, Michel said. Fraud offenses and fraud-related offenses are predicated on deceit, Michel said. It's this deceit that sometimes causes these fraud-related offenses to continue for very long periods of time and go undetected. Eventually, it catches up to you, Milanovich added. That's when we get involved. Michel said Wall, in addition to being accused of not holding the high-level license requirement, is also accused of possession and uttering a materially altered and counterfeit government-issued pilot licenses and documentation. Georgian College confirmed to the Star that they became aware of criminal charges against a part-time employee at the college today, but did not confirm whether Wall is still employed. A page on Georgian College's website under the name of Jeff Wall indicated that a former Air Canada pilot joined the school's military connected program in the summer of 2025. The page, which details Wall's own time in the military, has since been taken offline. Wall described his experience as a helicopter pilot in the summer of 1990 and a very excited passenger in F-18 and F-5 aircraft. He spent 4 years flying Sea Kings off the backs of Navy ships in Halifax. On Monday, Air Canada issued a statement regarding the probe and a monetary penalty it said Transport Canada had imposed on the former Air Canada pilot related to his type of certification. Safety was not compromised by this incident, Air Canada said in a media statement. The Canadian airline said it was taking the lack of appropriate licensing with the utmost seriousness. Air Canada said Wall was a fully trained pilot who held a valid commercial pilot license. However, the airline said he lacked the mandatory airline transport pilot license required to captain large aircraft with passengers in Canada. But Vincent Correa, professor and co-director of the Institute of Air and Space Law at McGill University, said it isn't just about safety. I think it's a question of the robustness of the system, he said. From a systemic perspective, if something like this went undetected, what can prevent someone not having that kind of experience and eagerness to enter a cockpit from going undetected? Correa added that an ATP-L license necessary to operate an aircraft as a captain was a higher step than a CPL-A, a commercial pilot license. That's because the captain is trusted with more safety and security responsibilities. He said for someone to have forged documents and go undetected for that long, they'd have to be familiar with the system because aviation is a world basically built on licenses and certifications. He also noted Wall's credentials would have been checked by foreign authorities since he flew internationally, a possibility Correa said was puzzling and perhaps indicative of a deeper issue. Durapia said he couldn't be sure if he hadn't flown on some of the flights in question himself. I do fly quite a bit, Durapia said. I usually just go to sleep on the flight. In our next article, social media ban for youth expected in online harms bill. Article by Mark Ramsey. The Carney government is preparing to unveil its long-awaited online harms bill Wednesday with a ban on social media use by children under 16 potentially on the table. Notice of that coming legislation was put out Tuesday following media reports that the Liberals plan to table a bill this week proposing a ban on social media use by children that companies could only get out of if they meet safety regulations. Prime Minister Mark Carney declined to comment Tuesday, telling reporters only that the government will be taking steps to protect people's data, their privacy, and their children. Culture Minister Mark Miller, who is responsible for the file, said Tuesday, "We will take all the reasonable measures to make sure kids are safe in this country." Miller has said a social media ban for children was very seriously under consideration, but insisted that wouldn't be the only thing in the legislation and wouldn't solve problems on its own. The Safe Social Media Act, which will make social media services and AI chatbots safer for children, is expected to be announced late Wednesday afternoon, according to a government news release. The legislation, the first such effort by the Carney government after failed attempts by the Trudeau Liberals, comes amid long-running debate about the harms caused by social media to children. We're seeing kids who are from the moment they're 4 and 5 years old, sometimes younger, growing up with technology attached to themselves. We're seeing a generation recognize that there are potential harms for their children in this new environment that didn't exist when I was a kid. Justice Minister Sean Fraser told reporters, "I think it's incumbent upon governments to recognize as society changes, as technology adoption increases, that we are respectful of people's rights, but at the same time that we can make moves to address modern challenges. The Star has not independently confirmed reports a social media ban will be included in the legislation. A previous effort by the government, which died because of the 2025 election, proposed the creation of a new digital safety regulator, forcing social media companies to take down harmful content and new hate speech offenses. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Beyond consideration of a social media ban, which has been implemented in other countries with mixed results, debate has intensified with questions of whether to fold AI chatbots into the expected online harms legislation after it emerged that OpenAI ignored internal warnings about alarming content posed to its chatbot, ChatGPT, by the person who went on to commit a mass shooting in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. The bill is expected to include some action on AI chatbots, but not a ban, according to a report in the National Post. Manitoba has already pledged to become the first jurisdiction in Canada to ban anyone under 16 from using social media and AI chatbots, and said the ban may first be implemented in schools. Ontario is also considering a social media ban and wider restrictions on students using cell phones at school. And our next article, PM says Gordie Howe Bridge set to open. Windsor span will become key route for billions in trade. Article by Rob Ferguson. It's the moment frustrated truckers and motorists have long been waiting for on both sides of the border. After years of construction delays and months of political tensions amid the Trump trade war, the $6.4 billion Gordie Howe Bridge linking Windsor and Detroit is ready to open, Prime Minister Mark Carney said Tuesday. It's positive news, obviously, he told reporters on the way into a cabinet meeting in Ottawa. The bridge will be open at the end of the week, he added, calling the massive cable stayed structure across the Detroit River a symbol, but also a fact of cooperation between our countries. While a ribbon-cutting ceremony is scheduled for Friday, the bridge will not begin carrying traffic until later in the month. Some Detroit news outlets are reporting the opening will be Monday, but bridge officials have not confirmed a date. With direct links to Highway 401 and I-75 in Michigan, the bridge, named after former Detroit Red Wings star and Saskatchewan native Gordie Howe, is expected to become the main route for two-way truck traffic between Canada and the United States, carrying billions of dollars worth of goods. It will allow truckers and travelers to avoid the nearly 100-year-old Ambassador Bridge, which on the Canadian side can only be reached by navigating a 5-kilometer Windsor road dotted with traffic lights, slowing traffic. What happens at this border impacts every kitchen table and factory floor in the country, said Canadian Trucking Association President Stephen Laskowski. Atlantic Seafood, Quebec Aerospace Parts, Prairie Agriculture, and Western Energy Equipment all rely on this crossing, he added in a statement, noting processing facilities such as X-ray scanners at the new bridge are state-of-the-art and will provide faster service. In Washington, to lobby members of Congress and others on the need for a renegotiated Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade deal, Premier Doug Ford hailed any moves to open the link, which is the longest cable-stayed bridge in North America and the 10th largest in the entire world. Hopefully it will, he said when asked about the plan to open it soon. It's going to create thousands and thousands of jobs and increased flow back and forth, Ford added in a nod to auto parts and other materials that are needed at auto plants on both sides of the border. if we get this trade deal done, everything is going to flow a lot quicker. There's going to be more jobs, more opportunities for everyone. The new bridge, an imposing and dramatic fixture on the skyline, visible from kilometers away, has been a political hot potato for months and is owned by Canada and Michigan. Canada funded the construction and will recoup the cost through tolls. After that, revenue will be shared. In February, U.S. President Donald Trump insisted in a rambling social media post that the bridge would not open until the United States is fully compensated for everything we have given them, Canada, and falsely claimed the bridge was built with virtually no U.S. content. Carney subsequently spoke to Trump over the phone and said Trump's bridge threat would be settled. Fearful of losing business, the owners of the Ambassador Bridge met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick prior to Trump's social media threat, the New York Times reported. The report said billionaire bridge owner and trucking magnate Matthew Maroon donated $1 million to a Trump supporting political action committee a month earlier. The White House and the PAC both denied any connection between the donation and Trump's outburst. All right, so we're going to move over to sports. Stanley Cup Finals. Stahl scores twice as Hurricanes tie series. Article by Kevin McGran. If there's a candidate for the Conn Smythe Trophy not named Mitch Marner, it might as well be the age-defying Jordan Stahl. The 37-year-old Carolina captain scored twice, including the game winner, leading the Hurricanes to a 5-3 win over the Vegas Golden Knights at T-Mobile Arena on Tuesday night. That tied the best-of-7 Stanley Cup final at 2 games apiece, with Game 5 set for Thursday night in Raleigh, North Carolina. Stahl has scored in all 4 games so far and has 7 in the playoffs. The offensive surge mirrors surprising regular season numbers for the veteran center, better known as one of the elite defensive forwards in NHL history. He finished with 20 goals in the regular season, the first time in a decade he'd hit that number. He scored at least 20 in 4 of his first 6 seasons, all with Pittsburgh. He was a key member of the Penguins' 2009 Stanley Cup victory and is chasing his second championship ring a mere 17 seasons later. He's a special athlete, Carolina coach Rod Brind'Amour said of his captain this week. Logan Stankoven and Jackson Blake scored early in the first period for Carolina, and Nicolas Ehlers added an empty netter. Rookie goalie Brandon Bussi picked up his first NHL postseason win in his first Cup final start. The result was almost predictable. Going into Tuesday's game, it had been 147 days since the Hurricanes had lost 2 in a row. They lost 4-3 in overtime to Detroit back on January 12th and 3-0 to St. Louis the next night, January 13th. We're very rarely out of games, Brind'Amour said before puck drop. That's probably why we've bounced back a lot. Carolina still has work to do. Teams that win Game 4 after trailing 2-1 in a best-of-7 Cup final own an overall series record of 11-16, which is a .407 win percentage. The last team to trail 2-1 and win the Cup was St. Louis over Boston back in 2019. It's been exciting hockey, Stahl said before the game. It's been back and forth. It's 2 teams pushing. Marner kept up his hot streak, adding an assist to extend his points lead in the playoff scoring race. He has at least a point in all 4 games of the final and assisted on William Karlsson's goal. Brett Howden tied the game 3-3 with his playoff-leading 14th goal. Mark Stone also scored for Vegas. The series has been remarkably high-scoring. It's just the 6th Cup final to see teams combine for at least 30 goals through the first 4 games. The firepower everybody has players that can score, said Brind'Amour. That's why you're seeing scores go up. We certainly don't want to give up that many goals. Who's in net? There is one pregame lineup mystery. Who would be in Carolina's crease? Frederick Anderson, who had started every game in the playoffs but started to look shaky, or Boosie, who had the number one job most of the season and replaced Anderson to start the third period in Game 3. Brind'Amour kept it close to his vest. Not going to discuss it. You'll see when we get out there. It's not usually his style, but Boosie is unusual as a goalie. He's left-handed, and that can mess up shooters. So letting Vegas mull it over might not have been a bad thing. In the end, the twist wasn't so much the starter, Boosie. He'd played well enough to deserve it. It was Pieter Kochevac as the backup with Anderson a healthy scratch. Anderson was hit in the head in the second period of Game 3 on a goal that was called back for goaltender interference, but Brind'Amour had insisted Monday that Anderson did not feel any ill effects. All right, our next article in sports, we're going to go from Stanley Cup, how about to World Cup? How Marsh made it to this moment. Canada's coach crafted identity around the world. Article by Joe Callahan. Jesse Marsh was late for an accounting exam. He was an Ivy League economics student, but also he was a professional athlete. The duality of man. Well, not quite. Just two strands to the lifelong plurality of Marsh. He was an affable, down-to-the-ground Midwesterner, as well as a hyper-focused, analytical go-getter. He was in a hurry, going and coming. Big things, better things, hard things like accounting exams, but he was making time, reaching out, connecting. It was 1996, which means Marsh was 22 years old then. He stopped and made time for Mitch Henderson, who reckons it was their first proper meeting. We were 2 years apart, but Jesse was in the same economics class. He'd just been drafted in the MLS and was commuting back and forth from Princeton to D.C., recalls Henderson. I remember he was on his way to take the exam I'd just taken, an accounting exam. He was rushing but stopped. But he did stop to talk. We had a funny exchange together. In the 30 years since, they've rarely been apart. Two very different Midwestern men trying to do the same damn thing, thrive in the tempest of coaching sports at the highest level. But first, that test. It went poor for both, or certainly poor for me. Maybe I shouldn't speak for Jesse, but hey, we both graduated. They did, from Princeton, and then from the pressure cookers that rattle and spit out coaching wannabes on the way up. Henderson has been head coach of the Princeton men's basketball team for 15 years, hauling in Ivy League titles and leading the Tigers on fairy tale March Madness runs with historic upsets. From Princeton to Chicago, New York to Salzburg and Leeds, Marsh has done plenty of leading, winning, and upsetting of his own. This week he embarks on something new, a first World Cup odyssey as head coach. In recent weeks, the star spoke in depth to Henderson and multiple others who spent time with Marsh on his lifelong trek across planet football as he spearheads Canada's men into the biggest moment in their history. This is Marsh's journey around the world. Made, molded, and mentored in the Midwest. Depending who you ask, Racine, Wisconsin is either known for Kringles, a flaky, fall-apart pastry brought over by the Danes in the 1800s, or for its sturdy, stoic, industrial backbone. Its first economy was built on machines used to separate the wheat from the chaff. Any player coached by Marsh over the past few decades would surely nod a knowing nod. The exciting, exhausting demands of Marsh the coach, the relentless work rate his system is built on, comes from many places. Plenty of it comes from his hometown and the wider Midwest. Marsh's father worked on the production line of a tractor part manufacturer. Effort was never optional. Yet, like the beloved Kringle with its 32 layers, there's more to Marsh and his part of the world than just work. He previously spoke with the Star about the community and human connection of his grandparents' tavern and of asking wife Kim out on their first date the day after he got his driving license at age 16. He wears his heart on his sleeve, Henderson says. It's like a pure place to grow up and be from. Great values, a pride in place. but down to earth. Leeds felt that way to me for Jesse, but Canada really feels that way. An incredible fit. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. After Princeton, Marsh and Henderson reconnected and formed their lifelong bond back in the Midwest. Henderson was honing his talents under veteran coach Bill Carmody at Northwestern. Marsh had followed his own instrumental mentor, Bob Bradley, who he worked under at Princeton and DC United, to the Chicago Fire. He was a combative midfielder and made his international debut on the back of form there. He was already thinking as a coach. Jesse would come to our games and sit behind the bench and listen in, says Henderson. We were spending a lot of time together and just always talking about sports and how they work. All roads lead to and from Princeton. The pathway from homely Midwest to Ivy League prestige might not seem logical or straightforward. It was neither, but Marsh family worked hard to afford Jesse's opportunity. Marsh has often hailed the influence of Bradley as the big reason I am where I am. In a wider sense, the orange bubble of Princeton gave liftoff to Marsh's dreams and aspirations. When some of those popped and fell, he'd return to the New Jersey campus to heal, hone, and go again. It was playing for the Tigers that lit the fire for seeing the wider world, early tournament trips across the Atlantic sparking my interest about what it would be like to live in Europe, Marsh once told The Athletic. Before they get there, there were learning curves. It was one of the ironies of his journey that Marsh's first job in management was a modest struggle in Montreal. He'd leave after one season, take his 3 kids out of school, and with Kim, travel the world for 6 months. When he came back, it was to Princeton to ponder what went wrong while doing home improvements for his friend. He was basically a landscaper, laughs Henderson. My wife was pregnant at the time with our second kid. We were doing our patio in the backyard. Jesse has a terrific sense of humor, very quick to tease. I remember being at a golf outing and Jesse was like, "Don't worry about me, just working on your backyard and putting in the bluestone." Jesse's outlook then, without being sorry for himself, was, "Geez, when am I going to get my break? Because I know I'm right there." It would come close by when the stateside arm of Red Bull's vast experience enterprise struck on Marsh as the man to lead them forward. He'd spend the next 6 years with its teams, buying all the way into the footballing philosophy, which is now Canada's too. He saw the vision for Red Bull, and it took off immediately, adds Henderson. We were there for that whole run. He was fluent in German with whatever the F he was doing. It's insane. I remember in 2017, 2018, and I was in the car with him and he was learning German, had tapes from the teacher. It's not an easy language, and he was already flying along. If you are interested in hearing the remainder of this story, our staff will be happy to read it to you. Please call 716-821-5555. All right, moving over to the business section. Article, trade surplus increases to $2.7 billion. New StatCan data viewed as positive for the economy. Article by Anastasia Blosser. Canada's merchandise trade surplus jumped to $2.7 billion in April, the second consecutive monthly surplus and the largest since the beginning of 2025, according to data released by Statistics Canada Monday. The federal agency reported Monday that merchandise exports rose 1.6% in April to a record $75.2 billion, while imports edged up 0.3%. The result was a trade surplus of $2.7 billion, up from a revised $1.8 billion in March and the highest level in 15 months. It's generally viewed as positive for the economy, explained BMO senior economist Robert Kapchik. Canada is selling more abroad than it is purchasing. Statistics Canada said the April surplus was the largest since January of 2025. Exports of energy products rose 9.7% in April, following a 23.4% increase the previous month. Statistics Canada said both increases were fueled by higher prices, which continued to climb amid uncertainty caused by the conflict in Iran. Crude oil exports, which increased 7%, contributed the most to the monthly gain. The trade balance has improved largely because of higher resource prices, said Kapchik. Even if the volume of those shipments rises only modestly, the value of those shipments has jumped sharply because of higher global prices for oil. For example, total exports rose 1.6% in April to a record $75.2 billion, driven by a 9.7% increase in energy product exports, which was partly offset by a 17.5% decline in exports of metal and non-metallic mineral products. Total imports rose 0.3% in April to $72.4 billion, supported by a 16.9% increase in imports of basic and industrial chemical, plastic, and rubber products. The increase in exports points to trade becoming a source of economic growth this spring after acting as a drag earlier in the year. Combined with encouraging GDP data for April, that could help calm fears of a recession after Statistics Canada announced the country's GDP had met the threshold for a technical recession in late May. Fuel analyst Dan Mateague agreed that trade could continue to provide support for the economy in the months ahead if oil prices continue to remain high. Given that Canada exports roughly 4.5 million barrels of oil a day, about 90% of it to the U.S., McTeague said it would not be surprising to see similarly strong trade figures in May and June. Needless to say, the surplus will help cushion the fiscal impact the energy crisis is having on both personal and public finances across the country, he said. TD economist Mark Ercola said with improving export volumes in April, there could be a positive reversal in trade dynamics on Canada's horizon. That said, with flows still heavily influenced by volatile components, notably oil, gold, and autos, trade contributions are likely to remain choppy through the remainder of the year, he continued. Ercolo also pointed to the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, CUSMA, review deadline on July 1st, which he says looks unlikely as negotiations have yet to gain steam. If the deadline were to be missed, he noted CUSMA would remain in effect and shift into rolling annual reviews, which he warns could bring prolonged negotiations and ongoing trade uncertainty. In our next article from the business section of your Toronto Star, has the condo market hit a new low? Some sellers are seeing 10 years of potential financial gains wiped out. Article by May Warren. One has a concrete pillar in the middle of the living room, another a balcony that faces a wall of other condos in a neighboring building. A third spent months on the market. They are all small downtown Toronto condos at under 700 square feet that recently sold for tens of thousands of dollars less than what they went for in 2017 or 2018. While the average condo price is up over the past 10 years, these sales show just how far the market for smaller generic units has tumbled. Real estate professionals say, erasing roughly a decade of potential gains. Absolutely, there's a lot of condos that are selling for 2018, 2017 levels, said Andrew Herold, co-founder and broker at condos.ca and property.ca. We saw incredible growth from 2017 till the spring of 2022, and all of that has pretty much been reversed. After years of hysterically low interest rates, the region is seeing the biggest price correction since the 1990s. Average prices have dropped almost 20% since the peak in February 2022, according to the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, TRREB. Tom Story, a real estate agent at Royal LePage Signature Realty, said Most condos he's selling this year are going at roughly middle 2019 prices, but units under 600 square feet without parking are the most difficult to sell. These condos were always sold from investor to investor, and now the investor is not the buyer, Story said. People who are buying condos want to live in them, so they are more picky and have more options, meaning they can get something bigger for not that much more money, he added. Harold said condos are the most vulnerable part of the market, as typical purchasers, often first-time homebuyers, are more impacted by changes in interest rates than people who already own their homes. We are seeing a lot of buyers sitting on the sidelines, he said, adding they're trying to time the market and figure out where the bottom is. No one knows the answer to that question, and factors like the ongoing war in Iran will impact whether prices plateau or continue to go down, he added. According to the TRREB, in the first quarter of 2017, the average price for a condo in the region was $489,551 compared to $618,484 in the first quarter of this year, an increase of 26%. In 2017, the Toronto market was booming. Prices had gone up about 24% from the first quarter of 2016. Developers were focused on building smaller units in the last 10 years. They were building one-bedroom units and units that were easier to sell, Harold added. But now the market is flooded with smaller units at or around 500 to 600 square feet in generic buildings. Brittany Kostov, Industry Relations Officer at Zoocasa, noted that in most neighborhoods, condo prices have increased since 2017. Based on a Zoocasa analysis of TRREB numbers from the first quarter of 2026 versus the first quarter of 2017, average condo prices rose by about $186,000 in the Toronto E10 Market District, West Hill and Centennial, Scarborough, and about $305,000 in the C4, Bedford Park, Northtown, Lawrence Park, and Forest Hill North. They also went up in the downtown entertainment district of C01 by about $116,000 over the same period. But they were down in CO3, Forest Hill South, and Oakwood Village by about $31,000, and in CO9, Rosedale, Moore Park, they were down by about $118,000. The market is hyper-local, said Kostov. Square footage, specific location, all of that plays a factor. Still, the losses for individuals are big. For example, an under 700 square foot waterfront one-bedroom plus den condo went for $582,000 in April of 2026, $26,000 less than the $608,000 it got in June of 2017. Those numbers don't include realtor fees or closing costs. Grace Chan, a realtor with Forest Hill Real Estate in Yorkville, agrees that larger units are holding value. If you have a good location and a good layout, that will help. So what happens to the unwanted condos? Some of them will be snapped up by large investment firms, Chan said. Family-owned global real estate firm Gesta Group announced plans to purchase up to $500 million worth of unsold Toronto condo units, rent them, and eventually sell them when the market goes up again in May. But the fate of many is still up in the air. I think the real answer is nobody really knows, Chan said. All right, moving over to the culture section of your Toronto Star. The Wedding of the Year. Article by Sarah Lang. Taylor Swift has mastered the art of misdirection. That's why it has been a matter of public mystery exactly when and where the pop superstar would marry her NFL tight end fiancé, Travis Kelce, though he quelled the very early date rumors when he said on a May 6th episode of his podcast that he can't wait for his wedding. Sure, as Swift's favorite number is 13, and that's a 10-carat old mine-cut diamond on her ring finger. The wedding of the year is happening in 2026, and we know that Swift only decided on the details very recently. You would think that I had been that type of person who would have obsessed over the idea of a wedding my whole life, she said on a British radio show last October while promoting her latest album, The Life of a Showgirl. But I actually never thought about what I would ever do or what I would want until I met the person. Here's everything we know about the nuptials of Taylor Allison Swift and Travis Michael Kelce. Date and venue. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. So, date and venue. Every week since the engagement announcement last August has brought a fresh round of rumors about when and where Swift would get married. There are even scam invitations doing the rounds. Country singer Maren Morris, with whom Swift duetted on Fearless, Taylor's version, told SiriusXM that she'd almost been taken in by a fake RSVP request via text. One persistent theory is that Swift cut a hefty check, per Page Six, to get another bride to release her booking for this Saturday at the luxurious Rhode Island venue, Ocean House. Swift has a strong connection to the Watch Hill area. She's owned a vacation home nearby for several years and has written lyrics about it in The Last Great American Dynasty. The Sun has speculated that she was planning to hold the wedding at the house itself. June 13th, 2026 has long been circled by Swifties as a possible wedding date. Not only does it include her favorite number, 13, but it boasts a favorable numerology, something Swift has said she is into. It adds up to 9, which is auspicious for the beginning of a new cycle. But wait, Page Six also has another theory, that the couple is actually getting married in New York City on July 3rd, just in time for the 4th of July weekend, one of Swift's favorite holidays, a shift from Rhode Island because the guest list was getting too long, and the couple considered Tennessee or a private island before landing on New York City. The tabloid claimed multiple sources said the wedding will happen at Madison Square Garden, the giant venue known as the home of the New York Knicks. It's also where Swift's former flame Harry Styles will be performing over 30-night residency this summer. Why the unusual venue? For the robust security and privacy the windowless stadium provides, enabling celebrity guests to be shuttled in and out via blacked-out buses. All of these dates have the advantage of happening before Kelce heads to NFL training camp at the end of July for what might be his final season. Swift's dress. According to the Daily Mail, Swift's dress will be inspired by Elizabeth Taylor, a Hollywood icon that she's long admired and has referenced in song lyrics twice. The specific reference is the full skirted 1950s gown Taylor wore at 18 to marry her first husband, Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., an ill-fated and abusive union that lasted just 8 months. Speculation over Swift's wedding dress designer is based on the brand she has worn consistently. Vivienne Westwood, Stella McCartney, and Oscar de la Renta are strong contenders, and she's been seen wearing more Dior items than usual in the past year. Sarah Burton, who designed Kate Middleton's wedding dress, is now helming the French fashion house Givenchy, has also been mentioned. Swift also has recently worn multiple dresses by the New York label Wiederhoft, which is known for its modern yet romantic wedding gowns. It's a similarly cool small brand to the one that made her engagement ring, Artifacts Fine Jewelry, helmed by jeweler Kindrick Lubeck, which Kelce helped design. I had shown him a video like a year and a half ago, and he was just paying attention to everything, it turns out, because when I saw the ring, I gasped, Swift told a British radio show. I was like, I know who made this. I know who made this. And also, you listen to me. There's another wedding style rumor making the rounds, no bangs. On social media, fans have been theorizing that Swift has been growing out her signature fringe for her updo on the big day, and to avoid arousing suspicion, has been wearing a clip-on hair piece in the interim. Evidence is flimsy, something to do with the thickness and her part moving around. Guests. A spot on this guest list is even more coveted than a box seat at the Eras tour. Sure bets include Kelce's brother and podcast co-host Jason Kelce and his wife Kylie Kelce, and Swift's family, including her father Scott, brother Austin, and mother Cupid Andrea. Swift's childhood friend Abigail Anderson is speculated to be a bridesmaid alongside Ashley Avignon, who has been pictured with her out and about lately. It's not possible that Swift's 3 beloved cats could make an appearance. Some familiar names have made allusions to possible attendance. Prince William said on a radio show that he and Kate were hoping and sure there might be an invitation, giving the caveat, "We'll see." Producer Jack Antonoff, Swift's longtime collaborator, recently dodged a leading question about whether he's going to any big weddings this summer by saying, "I hope so." Talk show host Graham Norton joked that he had signed multiple NDAs and could say nothing about the wedding, despite the fact that Swift invited him on air last fall. Other likely guests include friends that Swift had been seen out with publicly recently, including Lena Dunham, Selena Gomez, the Haim sisters, Gigi Hadid, and Zoe Kravitz, who is reportedly engaged to Swift's ex, Harry Styles. We're likely to see some of the Kelce's Kansas City Chiefs teammates too, including Patrick Mahomes and his wife Brittany and coach Andy Reid, who said he probably received an invite. One person who may not be there, Swift's former close friend Blake Lively, who is rumored to have been struck from the guest list after dragging her into a contentious legal battle with Justin Baldoni. The Bachelorette. Swift is reportedly planning 2 bachelorette parties to accommodate her busy famous friends' schedules, according to Us Weekly. These extremely private getaways will include her closest friends like Selena Gomez, the Haim sisters, Gigi Hadid, and future sister-in-law Kylie Kelce, and are speculated to be taking place in the Bahamas, New York City, or Nashville. And to hear the rest of the Taylor Swift Travis Kelce story, please call our staff, 716-821-5555. That's 716-821-5555. And moving back to the news, more than 32,000 displaced after massive earthquake. Death toll in the dozens as rescue crews search rubble for trapped people. Article by Jim Gomez in Joel Kalaputin. Rescuers searched ruined buildings in the southern Philippines on Tuesday to ensure no one was still trapped a day after one of the strongest earthquakes to hit the country in a half century killed at least 37 people and displaced more than 32,000. Only 4 people were considered missing in official records in the southern provinces near where the magnitude 7.8 quake struck Monday morning, but the Office of Civil Defense acknowledged several collapsed and heavily damaged buildings must be thoroughly inspected for possible survivors or casualties. The earthquake centered off Mindanao, the second most populous Philippine island, injured nearly 500 people and displaced more than 32,000, most of whom fled to emergency shelters. Many people who left their homes feared a tsunami. Waves up to 1.4 meters above tide level were measured in the Philippines, but the only tsunami damage reported was to 6 shanties on stilts in a coastal village. Smaller waves washed ashore in Indonesia and Palau and as far away as southern Japan. The earthquake left a trail of destruction, including in General Santos, a lively coastal city of more than 700,000 people known as the country's tuna capital, where at least 13 people were killed in collapsed buildings and due to falling debris. At least 18 died in Sarangani province, mostly in a landslide that buried houses in the mountainside town of Glan, according to Rafaelito Alejandro of the Office of Civil Defense. The other deaths were reported in southern provinces of South Cotabato and Davao Occidental and on Balut Island, disaster response officials said. About 2,500 houses and 117 government buildings and facilities were damaged in several provinces, according to an initial government damage assessment. The international airport in General Santos remained shut for a second day, forcing the cancellation of 63 domestic flights except for those on humanitarian missions. About 6,000 public school buildings in quake-hit provinces must be assessed before classes can resume. The quake struck on the first day of classes nationwide after a 2-month summer break, and many who sustained injuries were young students who had gathered with excitement for morning flag-raising ceremonies. Authorities have warned that buildings that sustained cracks could collapse due to aftershocks, some of them dangerously powerful. We cannot force the immediate reopening of schools because we have to ensure the integrity of the buildings, Alejandro said. And you have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 10th, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader today has been Dan Arth, and I thank you for listening.